The raise came through on a Tuesday. Direct deposit 4:12 p.m. The number in the app went from something depressing to something respectable in exactly the time it takes a phone to buzz once. And 18 months later, that same person has less in savings than the day before the raise happened. Not the same. Less. That is not a hypothetical. That is the actual shape of what happens to the majority of people who get a meaningful income jump in this country. And almost nobody sees it coming because it doesn't feel like losing money. It feels like finally getting to live. Meet three people. Priya, who got the promotion everyone said would change her life, and on paper it did. Marcus, who makes more than 90% of the country and genuinely could not cover a surprise $400 expense last month without moving money between two credit cards. And Sana, who makes less than either of them, has never had a dramatic year and is quietly quite far ahead of both. Same economy, same decade, three completely different outcomes from what looks, from the outside, like the same story. My name is Nick, and I spend an unreasonable amount of my life reading the footnotes of studies everybody quotes and nobody opens. If you have ever gotten a raise and felt, 6 months later, like nothing actually changed, hit subscribe. Here's the filter to hold for the next 20-some minutes. Comfort is not the reward for financial progress. Comfort is what financial progress feels like right up until the moment it stops being progress and starts being a plateau you can't see because it's padded. Single one of those things feels like winning. And that is exactly the problem, because winning and accumulating wealth are not the same activity. This video is about the gap between them. Let's start with the number that should embarrass an entire industry of financial content. The 2024 Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey breaks American households into 5 income quintiles. The bottom quintile spends an average of $35,046 a year. The top quintile spends $150,342. That's roughly a 4.3x gap in spending. Now here's the part that should stop you. The income gap between those same two quintiles is close to 8-to-1. Spending does not scale with income the way you'd expect. It scales with income the way water finds the shape of whatever container you hand it. Give people more room and, on average, across the entire income distribution of this country, they fill almost all of it, not because they're careless, because that is what the system is built to make feel normal. This is not a coincidence. And it is not a personal failing that happens to strike people one at a time in isolated bad decisions. There's a term for it in psychology that's older than most of the personal finance industry itself: hedonic adaptation. Brickman and Campbell published the foundational research on it back in 1971, and the finding has held up for over 50 years since humans adjust to a new baseline of circumstances astonishingly fast. And once adjusted, that new baseline becomes invisible. It stops registering as good. It just registers as normal. Your brain isn't built to notice a gain. It's built to notice a change. And once the change stops happening, the gain evaporates from your felt experience even though the number in your account is still sitting right there. So the raise doesn't feel like a permanent gift. It feels like a temporary thrill that fades in months. And the thing your brain does to chase that feeling back is spend more, because spending is the fastest lever you have for generating a new change to notice. Now put a name and a kitchen table under that theory. Priya is 31, works in healthcare operations outside Columbus, and just came off the best year of her career. Base salary went from $61,000 to $92,000, a genuine deserved, hard-earned $31,000 jump. Old apartment, $1,050 a month. A decent one-bedroom 15 minutes from work, nothing fancy, blinds that didn't quite close all the way. New apartment, $1,690, in a building with a gym she uses maybe 6 times a month and a parking garage she needed anyway. That's $640 a month gone before anything else moves, which is $7,680 a year. The old car, a 9-year-old Civic with 140,000 miles on it, got traded for something newer. Showing up to work in the same beat-up Civic while everyone knows you got promoted starts to feel like a costume that doesn't fit the role anymore. New payment, $510 a month versus roughly $140. she was putting toward the old car's maintenance and insurance. Add a gym membership she signs for out of guilt about the commute cutting into workout time, $70 a month. The old habit of meal prepping on Sundays quietly died somewhere around month 4 of the new job. Add clothes for a role that now involves more client-facing meetings, a category that essentially didn't exist in her old budget. Add that up. That's roughly 30 cents on the dollar. Not because Priya is bad with money. Because comfort has a price, and the price is denominated in exactly the amount of money that made the comfort possible. Here's the part that should really sit with you. Priya feels like she's doing great. What's in question is whether materially better and financially further ahead are the same thing. Now widen the lens, because Priya's story is the gentle version. Is the version that should actually scare you a little. Is 44, an operations director outside Dallas, household income with his wife sitting at $216, comfortably inside the top 10% of American household earners. And Marcus, by his own account, could not have covered a $400 surprise car repair last month without shuffling a balance between 2 cards. Not because he's irresponsible, because at $216,000 of household income, the reference group changes entirely. You stop comparing your spending to a national median. You start comparing it to the people around you. A 2025 Goldman Sachs retirement survey found that 40% of households earning over $500,000 a year say they are living paycheck to paycheck. $500,000, paycheck to paycheck. Marcus's mortgage on the house in the good school district runs $3,400 a month. 2 car payments, $1,380 combined, on vehicles that a decade-younger version of Marcus would have called absurd. Private school tuition for 1 kid, $14,000 a year because that's just what people do in his neighborhood. A country club membership he uses for client relationships, technically, but really because not having it now reads as a step down. None of this is a scandal. None of this is even unusual. This is what income does to spending in the absence of a deliberate intervention. Which brings us to Sana, and Sana's story is the quiet one, the one that doesn't photograph well. Sana is 33, makes $71,000 as a mid-level analyst in Pittsburgh, has gotten 3 raises over the past 5 years totaling about 19 lives. Almost exactly in the same apartment, drives almost exactly the same car. Her rent went up with inflation because landlords don't ask permission, but her lifestyle barely moved. Here's what that bought her that neither Priya nor Marcus has. She's redirected roughly $14,000 a year of new capacity into a retirement account and a taxable brokerage account. Run that at a conservative 7% annualized return over 30 years, and you're looking at somewhere around $1.06 million from that redirected raise money alone. Sana isn't smarter than Priya. She isn't more disciplined than Marcus in some abstract moral sense. She just never let her reference group move, and because it never moved, her spending never had a reason to chase it. This is the actual mechanism at the center of everything, the relative income hypothesis, first formalized by James Dusenberry back in 1949. Your satisfaction with your income depends far less on the absolute number than on how that number compares to 2 things: your own recent past income and the income of the people you compare yourself to. When your income rises, your own recent past resets almost immediately. When your income rises, the population of people you unconsciously benchmark yourself against also rises. Priya's new reference group at the higher position isn't the people from her old team anymore. The raise doesn't just give you money. It quietly enrolls you in a new comparison set where your new number is merely average. Let's put a hard number on how systemic this is, because it would be easy to write this off as 3 anecdotes. Economists Adif Mayan and Ludwig Straub published research tracking exactly this pattern across the entire income distribution. The top 1% of earners save well over 40% of their disposable income. The next 9% save around 20%. Households between the 51st and 90th percentile save around 12%. And the bottom 50% of earners save, on net, effectively zero. Notice the shape of that curve. It isn't that middle earners have nothing left to save after necessities. Marcus, at $216,000, obviously has room. It's that the room gets filled, almost automatically, by the exact process we just watched happen to Priya and to Marcus. That's not a story about willpower. That's a story about a mechanism that operates on nearly everyone. The U.S. personal saving rate sat at 4.6% in 2025. Compare that to April of 2020, when forced lockdowns and stimulus checks pushed it briefly to 33.8%. That swing tells you something the polite version of this conversation usually skips. Americans are not structurally incapable of saving a large share of their income. They demonstrated at scale that they could do it almost overnight. What collapsed the number back down to under 5% within a couple of years wasn't a return to necessity. It was a return to the container expanding again. By the way, if this is the kind of thing that actually changes how you think about money, I opened a school community where I go through exactly this stuff. Let's talk about what this actually costs across a working lifetime. Take Priya's $9,500 a year she's currently not capturing from her raise. If she had instead banked even half of that gap, roughly $9,000 a year, starting at 31 and running for 34 years, invested at a 7% average annual return, that's approximately $1.32 million. Nobody hands Priya a receipt that says $1.32 million forfeited. It just never shows up. There's no theft here, no villain, no single moment of obvious bad judgment, which is precisely what makes this the most expensive financial mistake most people will ever make without realizing they made one at all. For Marcus, the number is worse, because the absolute dollars in play are larger. Marcus and his wife had frozen their lifestyle at the spending level they had when household income was $140,000 and redirected 60% of that gap. At 7%, they'd be looking at roughly $2 million in additional wealth. Instead, that capacity is distributed across a mortgage on a bigger house, 2 car payments, a club membership, and a tuition bill. None of it wrong, all of it a choice, and every single choice made in a moment that felt like arriving somewhere, rather than like spending $2 million of future net worth. Here's what makes this particularly cruel as a trap. The spending that eats a raise doesn't feel like overspending while it's happening. It feels like catching up. It feels like finally being allowed to stop being careful. Every single item on Priya's list and Marcus's list is something a financial advisor would call reasonable for their income level. Nobody's buying yachts here. That's exactly why it's so effective at consuming money that should have gone toward the future.